The words hit me like a slap across the face, even though David had delivered them with his usual casual cruelty, not even bothering to look up from his phone as he spoke. "Listen, Caroline, about the promotion party tomorrow night. I think it would be better if you stayed home this time." I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, holding the elegant navy dress I had just picked up from the dry cleaners, the same dress I had worn to his company's Christmas party last year when 3 different people had complimented me on how stunning I looked. The same dress that had made David beam with pride as he introduced me to his colleagues as my beautiful wife. That was before his recent promotion to regional sales director, before the new office, the new salary, and apparently the new standards for what kind of wife was appropriate to display at corporate functions. "Stay home?" I asked, though part of me already knew where this conversation was heading. "But David, this is your promotion celebration. I've been looking forward to it for weeks." I had spent considerable time preparing for this event. That morning, I had visited my stylist, Marcus, who had perfected the subtle highlights in my auburn hair that caught the light and made my green eyes appear even more vibrant. I had gotten a manicure with a classic French polish, and I had carefully selected jewelry that would complement the navy dress. Pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, and a delicate gold bracelet that David had given me for our 5th anniversary. At 34, I had maintained the kind of natural beauty that had turned heads since I was a teenager. My skin was clear and radiant, thanks to a careful skincare routine and good genetics. My figure was slim and athletic from years of yoga and regular workouts. I knew I was attractive because people told me so regularly. Strangers in coffee shops, colleagues at the museum, the UPS delivery man who always lingered to chat when he brought packages to our house. But more than that, I had cultivated the kind of sophisticated elegance that comes from education, travel, and professional success. I carried myself with confidence, spoke intelligently about art and culture, and had the social graces that came from growing up in a family that valued refinement and intellectual achievement. David finally looked up from his phone. An expression on his face made my stomach clench with a familiar dread. It was the look he gave me when he was about to say something designed to cut deep, to remind me of my place in the hierarchy he had constructed in his mind. "Caroline, be realistic. This isn't like the old days when I was just another sales rep. I'm management now. Regional director. The people at this party are going to be executives. Their wives are going to be, well, they're going to be a certain type of woman." "What type of woman is that, David?" He set down his phone and walked over to his closet, pulling out the expensive suit I had helped him pick out at Nordstrom last month, the one that had cost more than I spent on clothes in an entire year. "You know what I mean. Polished, put together, the kind of women who can help their husbands' careers instead of—" He gestured vaguely in my direction. "Instead of what?" "Instead of making them look like they settled." The words hung in the air between us like poison gas, and I felt something inside me shrivel and die. In 8 years of marriage, David had never been particularly kind, but this level of casual cruelty was new, even for him. "Settled." I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. David was adjusting his tie now, preparing for what I knew would be his usual speech about how he was only being honest, how someone had to be realistic about these things, how I should be grateful for his honesty rather than hurt by it. "Caroline, look at yourself. Really look. You're 34 years old. You work at a museum making barely above minimum wage. You drive a 10-year-old Honda, and you dress like a librarian from a small town. Do you honestly think that's the image I want to project to my new colleagues?" I walked to the full-length mirror in our bedroom and looked at the woman staring back at me. What I saw was someone who had always been told she was beautiful. Long auburn hair that caught gold highlights in the sun. Green eyes that photographers had often commented on during the occasional modeling shoots I had done in college. High cheekbones and full lips that had made casting directors suggest I consider acting. My skin was flawless, my figure was enviable, and my sense of style was sophisticated rather than flashy. I dressed like someone who understood that true elegance comes from quality rather than ostentation. from classic pieces rather than trendy fashion statements. But more than that, I saw someone who had let 8 years of marriage to David chip away at her confidence until she couldn't see her own worth anymore. "I think I look fine," I said quietly. "Fine isn't good enough anymore, Caroline. Fine doesn't impress senior vice presidents or their wives. Fine doesn't help me get invited to the right dinner parties or included in the golf outings where real business gets done." David walked over and stood behind me at the mirror, and I watched him study our reflection with the cold calculation of a real estate appraiser evaluating property. "Look at us," he said. "Really look. I'm successful, ambitious, well-dressed, going places in my career. And you're—" He paused, as if searching for the right words to inflict maximum damage. "You're ordinary, Caroline. You're the kind of woman who disappears into the background at corporate events." I turned away from the mirror, unable to look at my own face while he spoke. The irony was that I had never been ordinary, had never disappeared into the background. Throughout high school and college, I had been the girl other girls wanted to look like. I had been homecoming queen, had been courted by multiple sororities, had been offered modeling contracts that I had turned down to focus on my education. Even now, even after 8 years of marriage had dulled some of my natural radiance, I was still the kind of woman who attracted attention wherever I went. Men held doors open for me. Women asked where I bought my clothes, and service staff went out of their way to be helpful because I was pleasant to look at and carried myself with grace. "I've worked too hard to get where I am to be held back by a wife who can't keep up," he continued. "This promotion is just the beginning. If I play my cards right, I could be vice president within 5 years. But that means everything about my image has to be perfect. My house, my car, my wardrobe, my wife. Everything has to send the message that I'm someone worth taking seriously. And I don't send that message. Not anymore." The finality in his voice told me that this wasn't a conversation, it was a verdict. David had made up his mind about my value as his wife, and I had been found wanting. "So what are you saying, David? That you don't want to be married to me anymore?" He laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that I need you to understand your role and stay in your lane. You're my wife, Caroline. You take care of the house, you support my career, and when it's appropriate for you to be seen with me, I'll let you know. And tomorrow night isn't one of those times. Tomorrow night definitely isn't one of those times." I hung the navy dress back in the closet, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to process what had just happened. The dress was beautiful, a classic sheath in midnight blue silk that hugged my curves perfectly and brought out the color of my eyes. I had paired it with nude heels that elongated my legs and made me appear even taller and more elegant than my natural 5'7" frame. In the span of 5 minutes, my husband had essentially told me that I was too ugly and unsuccessful to be seen in public with him at the most important event of his career. What should I tell people if they ask where my wife is? I asked, though I wasn't sure why I was still trying to engage with someone who had just humiliated me so thoroughly. Tell them you're not feeling well. Tell them you have other commitments. I don't care what you tell them, as long as you're not there to embarrass me. David walked out of the bedroom, leaving me alone with my reflection and the devastating realization that the man I had married saw me as an embarrassment, a liability, something to be hidden away when it mattered. I sat down on our bed and tried to understand how he had gotten to this point. When had David decided that I wasn't good enough for him? When had he started seeing me as an impediment to his success rather than his partner? The truth was, this conversation had been building for months, perhaps even years. Ever since David's promotion had been announced 6 months ago, he had been increasingly critical of everything about my life, my job, my clothes, my friends, even my hobbies. He made sarcastic comments about my little museum job and my charity store wardrobe. He rolled his eyes when I talked about the art exhibitions I was curating or the educational programs I was developing for underprivileged children. But I had told myself that he was just stressed about the new responsibilities, that once he settled into his new role, He would go back to being the man who had once told me I was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. I was wrong. David had changed, or maybe he had simply revealed who he really was underneath the charm he had used to win me 8 years ago. The man I was married to now was someone who saw his wife as an accessory, a reflection of his success or lack thereof. And apparently I no longer reflected well on his aspirations. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Looking back, I could trace the gradual erosion of his respect and affection over the past 3 years. It had started with small criticisms, suggestions that I might want to update my wardrobe, comments about my lack of ambition, observations that other wives in his company seemed more polished than I was. At first, I had tried to accommodate his suggestions. I had bought new clothes, gotten more expensive haircuts, and made an effort to engage more enthusiastically with his colleagues and their wives. But nothing I did seemed to satisfy him, and gradually I had begun to realize that the problem wasn't my appearance or my social skills. The problem was that David was ashamed of who I was at a fundamental level. My job at the Metropolitan Museum of Contemporary Art was something I was incredibly proud of, but David saw it as evidence of my lack of ambition. I was the chief curator, responsible for acquiring and displaying some of the most important contemporary art in the region. I had organized exhibitions that had been reviewed in major publications, had written articles for prestigious academic journals, and had built relationships with artists and collectors throughout the art world. But to David, the fact that my salary was modest compared to his meant that my work was unimportant, that my expertise was irrelevant, that my professional accomplishments were something to be dismissed rather than celebrated. The same was true of my appearance. I had always been naturally beautiful, but I had never been the type of woman who spent hours each day on elaborate beauty routines or who defined herself through expensive designer clothing. I preferred classic, elegant pieces that would last for years rather than trendy items that would be out of style within a season. My beauty routine was sophisticated but not excessive, high-quality skincare products, professional hair coloring to maintain my natural auburn shade, and makeup that enhanced my features without looking overdone. I exercised regularly, ate well, and took care of myself in ways that maintained my natural attractiveness without requiring constant artificial enhancement. But David had begun to compare me unfavorably to wives of his colleagues who had clearly spent enormous amounts of time and money on their appearance. Women who had personal trainers, cosmetic procedures, and shopping budgets that exceeded my annual salary. He wanted a trophy wife, and I was simply a woman who happened to be beautiful without making it my full-time job. I spent the next evening alone in our house, listening to David get ready for his promotion party, the shower running, the sound of his electric razor, the opening and closing of closet doors as he chose between ties. I heard him on the phone confirming details with colleagues, his voice excited and animated in a way it never was when he spoke to me anymore. He left without saying goodbye, and I heard his BMW pull out of the driveway at exactly 7 o'clock. I ordered Thai food for dinner and ate it while watching a documentary about Impressionist painting, trying to lose myself in work that actually mattered to me. But every few minutes, I found myself imagining the party David was attending without me, the elegant hotel ballroom, the well-dressed executives and their wives, the speeches and toasts celebrating his success. I wondered if anyone would ask about me, and if they did, what David would tell them. Would he say I was sick, or would he simply let people assume that he was single? Would he flirt with other women while I sat at home eating pad thai from a cardboard container? The thought made me feel pathetic, which made me angry, which made me realize that I had been accepting unacceptable treatment for far too long. I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, really looked for the first time in months. What I saw was a woman who was undeniably beautiful. My skin was luminous, my hair was thick and shiny. My eyes were bright and intelligent. My body was toned and graceful from years of yoga and dance classes. My bone structure was the kind that would age well, the kind that would make me beautiful at 60, just as it had made me beautiful at 20. I was not ordinary. I was not the kind of woman who disappeared into the background. I was the kind of woman who attracted admiring glances wherever I went, who made other women ask about my skincare routine and workout regimen, who made men stumble over their words when they tried to talk to me. But somewhere along the way, I had allowed David's increasing dissatisfaction and criticism to convince me that I was less than I actually was. I had internalized his assessment of my worth and forgotten that his opinion was just one person's perspective, and not even an objective one. I was also successful in my own right, even if David didn't consider my work impressive by his standards. I was the chief curator at one of the most respected cultural institutions in the city. I had a master's degree in art history from Yale, had published articles in prestigious academic journals, and had been featured in Art in America magazine as one of the rising stars under 35 in the museum world. My work might not generate the kind of income that David valued, but it had impact and meaning and respect within my field. I had organized exhibitions that had been reviewed in the New York Times, had acquired pieces that had increased in value by millions of dollars, and had built educational programs that had influenced arts education policy at the state level. But none of that mattered to David because it didn't translate into the kind of social status he thought he needed to advance his corporate ambitions. I went to bed that night feeling angry and hurt and foolish for having accepted his assessment of my worth. I lay awake for hours, listening for the sound of David's car in the driveway, wondering what time he would come home and whether he would even bother to tell me how the party had gone. He came home at nearly 2 a.m, and I pretended to be asleep when he stumbled into the bedroom, smelling like expensive whiskey and women's perfume that wasn't mine. He passed out immediately, snoring loudly, and I lay beside him feeling like a stranger in my own bed. The scent of perfume lingered on his clothes, expensive and sophisticated in a way that suggested he had been very close to whoever was wearing it. I recognized it as Chanel No. 5, the same fragrance worn by Jennifer Walsh, one of his colleagues' wives who had always made a point of complimenting David at company events while barely acknowledging my presence. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the full implications of what was happening to my marriage. David wasn't just embarrassed by me. He was actively seeking the company of women he found more appealing. The promotion party I hadn't been allowed to attend had become an opportunity for him to socialize with other men's wives while his own wife sat at home like some shameful secret. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee, sitting at our kitchen table and watching the sun rise over our neighborhood. David had been right about one thing. This was just the beginning of his career trajectory, and if I stayed married to him, I would spend the next 20 years being hidden away whenever he needed to impress people who mattered. I was lost in these thoughts when the phone rang at 8:30 in the morning. David was still asleep, so I answered it, expecting it to be a telemarketer or maybe my mother calling to check in. Instead, I heard a voice I recognized but had never spoken to directly. "Hello, may I speak with Caroline Mitchell, please?" "This is Caroline." "Caroline, this is Richard Blackwood, David's boss at Sterling Financial Group." My heart stopped. Richard Blackwood was the senior vice president of David's company, the man who had approved his promotion and who would determine whether he advanced any further up the corporate ladder. He was exactly the kind of person David was desperate to impress, the kind of person whose opinion could make or break his career. "Mr. Blackwood," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "how can I help you?" "I hope you don't mind me calling so early, but I wanted to reach you before you left for work. I have something rather important to discuss with you." "Of course. Is everything all right?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Richard Blackwood spoke again, his tone was different, warmer, more personal, but also tinged with something that sounded like disappointment. "Caroline, I want to start by saying that I was extremely disappointed not to meet you at David's promotion celebration last night. When I asked him where his wife was, he mentioned that you were feeling under the weather. But I have to be honest, I was skeptical." My mouth went dry. "Skeptical?" "You see, Caroline, I've been doing some research since last night, and I've discovered something quite interesting about you." I could barely breathe. What kind of research? The kind of research that any good executive does when he's trying to understand the full picture of his employees' lives. I like to know who I'm working with, Caroline. I like to understand what kind of people they are, what their values are, what kind of families they come from. I waited, not sure where this conversation was going, but certain that it couldn't be good for David. I have to admit, when David first started working for me 4 years ago, I was impressed by his sales numbers, but concerned about his character. He struck me as someone who was a little too eager to impress, a little too willing to say whatever he thought people wanted to hear. I see, I said, though I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say. But then I did my homework on his background, and I discovered that he was married to Caroline Mitchell, the chief curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Contemporary Art. The same Caroline Mitchell who organized the Voices of Change exhibition that my wife and I attended last year. The same Caroline Mitchell who gave that brilliant lecture on contemporary social justice art that completely changed how I think about the role of museums in society. I felt the world shift around me. Richard Blackwood knew who I was. Not only knew who I was, but respected my work. You remember my lecture? Remember it? Caroline, my wife, and I have been following your career for 3 years now. We're major supporters of the museum, and we consider you one of the most innovative curators in the country. When I realized that David Mitchell was married to you, it completely changed my assessment of his potential. I sat down heavily in one of our kitchen chairs, trying to process what I was hearing. You see, Richard continued, I don't just promote people based on sales figures. I promote people who have the judgment to build strong partnerships, who understand quality and culture, who can represent our company at the highest levels of society. When I learned that David had the intelligence and good taste to marry someone of your caliber, it told me everything I needed to know about his potential. The irony was so profound that I almost laughed. David's promotion had been based, at least in part, on Richard Blackwood's respect for me, the wife David now considered too embarrassing to be seen with in public. Mr. Blackwood, I said carefully, I'm not sure David has mentioned how much my work means to your assessment of him. Oh, I'm certain he hasn't. Men like David often don't fully appreciate what they have until it's gone. Which brings me to the reason for my call. Yes. Caroline, I want to offer you something. Sterling Financial Group has been looking for someone to head our new corporate foundation. Someone with the expertise to guide our philanthropic investments and cultural partnerships. It's a significant position, executive level, reporting directly to me, with a salary that would be competitive with senior positions at major museums. I nearly dropped the phone. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you the opportunity to have a conversation about a job. But Caroline, I have to be honest with you about something. What's that? Part of what makes you attractive for this position is your reputation and your connections in the arts community. But another part is that I believe you could be a tremendous asset to your husband's career if he were smart enough to recognize it. I was quiet for a moment, trying to understand the full implications of what he was saying. Mr. Blackwood, may I ask you something directly? Of course. Why wasn't I invited to David's promotion party last night? The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that I began to wonder if the call had been disconnected. Caroline, Richard said finally, are you telling me that David didn't invite you to his own promotion celebration? He told me that I shouldn't attend because it would be better for his career if I stayed home. Another long silence. Caroline, I need you to understand something. Last night's event wasn't just a party. It was an assessment. I was evaluating David's readiness for increased responsibility, and a significant part of that evaluation involved meeting his wife and understanding his judgment in personal relationships. My heart started pounding. The fact that David came to his own promotion party without his wife, a wife who happens to be one of the most accomplished professionals I've ever encountered, raises serious questions about his judgment, his priorities, and his fitness for leadership. What kind of questions? The kind of questions that make me reconsider whether he's the right person for this position. I heard David's alarm clock going off upstairs, followed by the sound of him stumbling to the bathroom. In a few minutes, he would come downstairs expecting his usual breakfast and coffee, completely unaware that his boss was on the phone reassessing his entire future. "Mr. Blackwood," I said, "I think there are some things about my marriage that you should understand before you make any career decisions about David." "I'm listening." "Over the next 25 minutes, I told Richard Blackwood everything. Not because I wanted to sabotage David's career, but because I was tired of pretending that his treatment of me was acceptable. I told him about last night's conversation, about David's assessment of my appearance and social value, about his decision to hide me away rather than risk being seen with someone he considered beneath his new status. I told him about the gradual erosion of respect and affection in our marriage, about David's increasing criticism of my work and appearance, about his growing belief that I was holding him back rather than supporting his ambitions. Richard listened without interrupting, and when I finished, the silence stretched so long that I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake. "Caroline," he said finally, "I owe you an apology." "You do." "I should have done more research before promoting David. If I had understood his character more completely, if I had known how he treats the people closest to him, I never would have advanced him to a leadership position." "Mr. Blackwood." "Please call me Richard. And please let me finish, because I need you to understand something important." I heard David's footsteps on the stairs and knew I had only a few minutes before he appeared in the kitchen. "Caroline, I've been in business for 35 years, and I've learned that you can tell everything you need to know about someone's character by how they treat the people who are closest to them. A man who is cruel to his wife will be cruel to his employees. A man who is ashamed of his partner's accomplishments will be jealous and undermining of his colleague's success. And David is no longer employed by Sterling Financial Group as of this morning." The words hit me like a shock wave. Even though I had known this was a possibility, hearing it stated so definitively was overwhelming. He was fired. His promotion was rescinded, and he was offered the opportunity to resign rather than be terminated for cause. He chose resignation. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. David's career, the promotion he had worked toward for years, the future he had been so determined to build, all of it was gone because he had been too ashamed of me to bring me to a party. "Caroline," Richard continued, "I want to make something clear. This decision wasn't based on personal feelings or relationship drama. It was based on professional judgment about David's fitness for leadership." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because I need you to understand that a man who would hide his wife, a wife with your credentials and accomplishments, because he thinks she's not impressive enough for his colleagues, is not someone I can trust to make good decisions about anything." Richard's voice took on a more personal tone. "Caroline, I have 2 daughters. Both are in their 20s, both starting their careers, both brilliant and accomplished women. When I think about them building their professional lives, possibly getting married, I want them to find partners who are proud of their success, not threatened by it." "I see. What David did to you, hiding you away, diminishing your accomplishments, treating your career as an embarrassment, that's not just personal cruelty. It's a fundamental failure of judgment that calls into question his fitness for any position of authority." David walked into the kitchen wearing his robe, his hair sticking up in every direction, looking like he had aged 5 years overnight. The smell of expensive perfume and whiskey still clung to him, and there were lipstick traces on his collar that he hadn't bothered to hide. "Who's on the phone?" he asked, pouring himself coffee with the automatic movements of someone who hadn't fully processed what was happening. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time in years. I saw a man who was so insecure about his own worth that he had to diminish everyone around him to feel successful. I saw someone who was so focused on impressing other people that he had forgotten how to value the people who actually loved him. And I saw someone who had just destroyed his own career through his cruelty and stupidity. "It's Richard Blackwood," I said, holding out the phone. "He wants to talk to you." The coffee mug slipped from David's hands and shattered on the kitchen floor, hot coffee splashing across the tiles and soaking into his slippers. His face went white, then gray, then a sickly green color as the full implications hit him. Richard Blackwood? My boss, Richard Blackwood? What does he want? "I think you should ask him yourself." David took the phone with shaking hands, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, panic, and growing horror as Richard explained the purpose of his call. "Yes, sir," David said, his voice becoming smaller and more defeated with each word. "Yes, I understand. No, sir, Caroline wasn't feeling well." "What? No, I don't think that's. Yes, sir, I'll be right there." He hung up the phone and stared at me as if I were a stranger. "He wants to see me in his office immediately. He wants to discuss my personal judgment and how it affects my professional responsibilities." "I see. Caroline, what did you tell him?" I began cleaning up the broken coffee mug, taking my time to consider how to respond. The pieces were sharp and numerous, and I found myself thinking about how similar they were to the fragments of our marriage. Dangerous to handle, impossible to put back together, and ultimately destined for the garbage. I told him the truth, David. "What truth?" "The truth about why I wasn't at your promotion party. The truth about how you see me and treat me. The truth about what kind of man you really are." David's face went white again. "You sabotaged my career. You destroyed everything I've worked for." "No, David, you destroyed everything you worked for. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own behavior." This is unbelievable. My own wife stabbing me in the back. Your own wife refusing to be ashamed of herself anymore. David stood there in his coffee-stained robe, looking like a man who had just realized that his entire world was built on foundations that were crumbling beneath his feet. "Caroline, you have to call him back. You have to tell him there was a misunderstanding, that you were confused or emotional or what, David? Or lying? Because that's what you're asking me to do. Lie to protect you from the truth about how you treat people. This is my career we're talking about. This is our future. No, this is your career. And apparently, I'm not part of your future anyway, remember? I'm too ordinary and unsuccessful to be seen with you in public." David ran his hands through his hair, pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. The movement was frantic, desperate, and I could see the full scope of his panic beginning to set in. "Okay, I said some things last night that I didn't mean. I was stressed about the party, worried about making a good impression. But you can't seriously be willing to destroy my career over one stupid argument. David, this wasn't one stupid argument. This was you telling me that I'm an embarrassment, that I need to stay hidden so I don't hurt your image. This was you revealing how you really see me and how you really value our marriage. But I love you, Caroline. You're my wife." The words sounded hollow, desperate, completely different from the cold calculation he had shown me the night before. It was the kind of love declaration that comes not from genuine feeling, but from panic at the prospect of losing something valuable. "You love me when it's convenient for you. When I'm making your breakfast or ironing your shirts or listening to you complain about work. But you don't love me enough to be proud of me, and you don't love me enough to want me beside you when you're celebrating your success." David's phone rang, and he looked at it with the expression of a man facing his own execution. "It's the office," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then you should probably get dressed and go talk to your boss." David showered and dressed with the mechanical movements of someone in shock, and I watched him prepare to face the consequences of treating his wife like something shameful that needed to be hidden away. He put on his most expensive suit, the one we had bought together for his last promotion, and I remembered how proud he had been that day, how excited about the future we would build together. Before he left, he He turned to me one last time. Caroline, is there anything I can do? Anything I can say? I can't lose this promotion. I can't go backward in my career. I looked at my husband and felt something that was almost like pity. He still didn't understand that the problem wasn't his career trajectory, it was his character. You should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't good enough to be seen with you. David left for what I suspected might be the most important conversation of his professional life, and I sat alone in our kitchen, thinking about Richard Blackwood's job offer and what it might mean for my future. The house felt different without David's anxious energy filling the space. I could hear birds singing outside, could see sunlight streaming through the windows in a way that seemed brighter and more hopeful than it had in months. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely in my own home. I called the museum to tell them I would be late, then drove across town to Sterling Financial Group's headquarters. I had never seen David's office, had never been invited to his workplace, and as I walked through the elegant lobby and took the elevator to the executive floor, I realized that I was about to see a part of his life that he had kept carefully separate from our marriage. The lobby was impressive, marble floors, modern art on the walls, and the kind of sophisticated atmosphere that spoke to serious money and important business. I could see why David was so determined to succeed in this environment. It represented everything he thought he wanted from his professional life. Richard Blackwood's assistant, impeccably dressed woman in her 40s, showed me into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Richard himself was exactly what I had expected. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of making important decisions and having them respected. "Caroline," he said, standing to shake my hand, "thank you for coming on such short notice. Thank you for the invitation. Please sit down. Can I offer you coffee? Water?" I accepted coffee and settled into one of the leather chairs facing his desk, trying to read his expression and understand what this meeting was really about. The office was elegantly appointed, but not ostentatious. Expensive furniture that was built to last rather than impress. Art that was clearly chosen for personal taste rather than status. And family photos that suggested a man who valued relationships over appearances. "Caroline, I want to start by apologizing for my employee's behavior. What David said to you, the way he treated you, it's completely unacceptable and reflects poorly on everyone associated with this company." "Richard, you don't need to apologize for my husband's choices. Actually, I do, because I promoted him, and I did it partly based on my respect for you and your accomplishments. If I had known that he was hiding you away, that he was ashamed of his association with one of the most talented people I've ever encountered, well, let's just say I would have made different decisions." "What kind of different decisions?" Richard leaned back in his chair, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. "Caroline, I've been in business for 35 years, and I've learned that you can tell everything you need to know about someone's character by how they treat the people who are closest to them. A man who is cruel to his wife will be cruel to his employees. A man who is ashamed of his partner's accomplishments will be jealous and undermining of his colleague's success. And David is no longer employed by Sterling Financial Group as of this morning." Even though I had expected this answer, hearing it stated so definitively was still overwhelming. I thought about David, probably sitting in some other office right now, being told that his promotion was rescinded and his future with the company was over. He was fired. His promotion was rescinded, and he was offered the opportunity to resign rather than be terminated for cause. He chose resignation. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. David's career, the promotion he had worked toward for years, the future he had been so determined to build, all of it was gone because he had been too ashamed of me to bring me to a party. "Caroline," Richard continued, "I want to make something clear. This decision wasn't based on personal feelings or relationship drama. It was based on professional judgment about David's fitness for leadership." "I understand." "Do you? Because I need you to understand that a man who would hide his wife, a wife with your credentials and accomplishments, because he thinks she's not impressive enough for his colleagues, is not someone I can trust to make good decisions about anything. Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. From this high up, the city looked organized and manageable, like a planned community rather than the chaotic collection of ambitions and disappointments that it actually was. Leadership isn't just about sales figures or technical competence. It's about judgment, character, and the ability to recognize and value talent. David failed all 3 tests. What will happen to him now? That's up to him. He's a competent salesperson, and with the right attitude adjustment, he might be able to rebuild his career elsewhere. But Caroline, that's not why I asked you here. Why did you ask me here? Richard returned to his desk and pulled out a thick folder with my name on it. The folder was substantial, suggesting that he had done considerable research on my background and qualifications. Because I meant what I said about the foundation position. Sterling Financial Group is launching a major philanthropic initiative, and we need someone with your expertise to lead it. He opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. The budget would be $50 million annually. The focus would be on education, arts programming, and cultural preservation. You would have complete autonomy over grant-making decisions, and you would report directly to me. I looked at the salary figure on the contract and felt my eyes widen. It was nearly 3 times what I made at the museum. Richard, this is incredibly generous, but I have to ask, are you offering me this job because you feel sorry for me? I'm offering you this job because you're the most qualified person I've ever encountered for this type of position. The fact that your husband was too stupid to recognize your value doesn't change your qualifications. But the timing is coincidental. We've been planning this initiative for 8 months, and your name has been at the top of our candidate list the entire time. The only reason I didn't approach you sooner was because I assumed you were happy at the museum and might not be interested in corporate philanthropy. I studied the contract, trying to understand if this was real or some kind of elaborate consolation prize. The scope of responsibility was enormous, overseeing educational grants, cultural partnerships, and community development initiatives throughout the Southeast. It was the kind of position that could have real impact, that could change lives and communities in meaningful ways. Caroline, Richard said gently, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you planning to stay married to David? The question caught me off guard, though I realized I had been asking myself the same thing since last night. The honest answer was that I didn't know if there was anything left to save in our marriage, or if I even wanted to try. I don't know, I said honestly. I ask because this position would involve a significant amount of travel, networking, and public representation. You would be the face of Sterling Financial Group's philanthropic efforts, and frankly, you would be one of the most visible and influential people in the regional arts and business community. And I want to make sure that if I hire you, you won't have a husband at home undermining your confidence or trying to convince you that you're not qualified for the role. I thought about David, probably at home right now, trying to figure out how to salvage his career and his marriage. I thought about the conversation we would have when I got home, the apologies he would offer, the promises he would make about changing and appreciating me more. And I realized that I didn't want to hear any of it. Richard, can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you really call me this morning? Was it just about the job, or was there something else? Richard was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was more personal than it had been all morning. Caroline, I have 2 daughters. They're both in their 20s, both starting their careers, both trying to figure out how to navigate professional relationships with men who may or may not value their intelligence and accomplishments. I see. When I realized that someone as accomplished as he was being hidden away by her own husband, treated like an embarrassment rather than an asset, well, I felt like I needed to do something about it. So this is about your daughters. This is about the kind of world I want my daughters to live in. A world where talented women aren't diminished by insecure men. A world where accomplishment and intelligence are valued regardless of gender. I looked at the contract again, at the salary and benefits, and the scope of responsibility it represented. It wasn't just a job, it was a chance to build something meaningful, to have real impact, to be valued for my expertise rather than hidden away because of someone else's insecurity. Richard, I accept your offer. Just like that. Just like that. When do I start? How about Monday? That gives you the weekend to consider whether you want to give David another chance or whether you'd prefer to start your new life without the baggage of someone who doesn't appreciate what he has. I spent the drive home thinking about the conversation I was about to have with David and how different my life was about to become. The woman who had been told she was too ugly for a corporate party was about to become one of the most influential people in the regional business community. The woman who had been dismissed as an embarrassment was about to have a platform to shape philanthropic policy for one of the city's largest financial institutions. When I got home, David was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, apparently applying for jobs online. He had changed out of his expensive suit and was wearing casual clothes that made him look younger and more vulnerable than he had in the corporate armor he usually wore. He looked up when I walked in, and I could see that he had been crying. "Caroline, we need to talk." "Yes, we do. I lost my job. Blackwood fired me because of what you told him about last night." I sat down across from him, studying his face and trying to determine if he had learned anything from this experience, or if he was simply angry about the consequences. "I'm sorry that happened, David." "Are you? Because it seems like you wanted this to happen. It seems like you were trying to punish me." "I wasn't trying to punish you. I was trying to be honest about how you treat me." David closed his laptop and leaned forward, his expression intense and desperate. "Caroline, I know I said some terrible things last night. I know I hurt you. But you have to understand, I was under so much pressure, so worried about making the right impression. I didn't mean any of it." "Which part didn't you mean? The part about me being ordinary, or the part about me being an embarrassment to your career?" "All of it. None of it. Caroline, you're beautiful. You're intelligent. You're accomplished. I've always been proud of you. Proud enough to introduce me to your colleagues. Proud enough to want me at your promotion party." David was quiet for a moment, and I could see him trying to find the right combination of words to salvage the situation. "I was an idiot, Caroline. A complete idiot. I let the pressure get to me, and I said things I didn't mean because I was scared and insecure." "Scared of what?" "Scared that I wasn't good enough for the promotion. Scared that I would embarrass myself in front of important people. Scared that—" "That what?" "That they would see you and realize that you're more accomplished than I am, that you're smarter and more cultured and more impressive, and they would wonder what someone like you is doing with someone like me." For the first time in this entire ordeal, David had said something that sounded completely honest. "So, you decided to leave me at home rather than risk anyone noticing that I might be more impressive than you are?" "I decided to leave you at home because I'm an insecure asshole who doesn't deserve the wife he has." I looked at David and felt something that was almost like sympathy. Almost. "David, do you know why Richard Blackwood promoted you in the first place?" "Because of my sales numbers." "Because he was impressed that you had the judgment and good taste to marry someone like me. Your promotion was based, at least partially, on his respect for my work and his assumption that being married to me reflected well on your character." David stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "What?" "Richard Blackwood and his wife are major supporters of the museum. They've been following my career for 3 years. When he realized that David Mitchell was married to Caroline Mitchell, it changed his entire assessment of your potential." "You're saying that my promotion was because of you?" "I'm saying that your promotion was because Richard Blackwood believed that a man smart enough to marry me would be smart enough to handle increased responsibility." David put his head in his hands, and I could see the full scope of the irony finally dawning on him. I destroyed my career because I was ashamed of the very thing that made my career possible. Yes. Caroline, what can I do? How can I fix this? I thought about the contract in my purse, about the new job that would transform my life, about the opportunity to work with people who valued my expertise rather than being embarrassed by it. You can start by understanding that this isn't about one stupid comment or one bad night. This is about 8 years of marriage during which you've gradually made me feel smaller and less important. That's not true. It is true, David. Last night wasn't an aberration. It was the logical conclusion of years of subtle put-downs and casual dismissals. David looked up at me, and I could see him trying to process this larger indictment of our relationship. So what are you saying? That you want a divorce? I'm saying that I want a marriage where my husband is proud of me, where he values my accomplishments and wants to share my success with other people, where he sees me as an asset to his life rather than an embarrassment. I can be that husband, Caroline. I can change. Can you? Can you really be proud of being married to someone more accomplished than you are? Can you handle having a wife who makes more money than you do, who gets more recognition than you do, who has more professional respect than you do? Why would that matter? I reached into my purse and pulled out the contract Richard Blackwood had given me, because I just accepted a job as the executive director of Sterling Financial Group's new philanthropic foundation. The salary is $250,000 a year, plus benefits and bonuses. David's face went white. $250,000. Plus, I'll be managing a $50 million annual budget and working directly with Richard Blackwood on philanthropic strategy. The same Richard Blackwood who fired me this morning. The same Richard Blackwood who fired you this morning because you were ashamed of your wife. David stood up and began pacing around the kitchen, just as he had that morning when he first realized the scope of his mistake. This is insane. You're going to work for the man who destroyed my career. I'm going to work for a man who values my expertise and wants to give me the opportunity to have real impact in the community. Caroline, you can't take this job. It's a conflict of interest. It's like sleeping with the enemy. It's like working with people who appreciate my talents instead of being embarrassed by them. David stopped pacing and looked at me with desperation. If you take this job, if you start working for Blackwood, it will destroy any chance I have of rebuilding my career in this city. No one will hire me if they think my wife is working for my former boss who fired me. I'm not responsible for rebuilding your career, David. I'm responsible for building my own. That's not what people will think. Then maybe you should move to a different city. The words hung in the air between us, and I realized that I had just suggested the end of our marriage without quite saying it directly. Caroline, are you asking me to choose between staying married to you and having a career? I'm asking you to choose between supporting your wife's career and prioritizing your own insecurity. David sat back down and buried his face in his hands. I can't win. If I stay here, I'll be known as the guy whose wife works for the man who fired him. If I leave, I'll be starting over somewhere else at 38 years old with a resume that shows I got fired from my last job. You'll be starting over because you made choices that had consequences. And you'll be starting over too, Caroline. If I leave, you'll be a divorced woman working for a man who might lose respect for you once he realizes your marriage failed. I hadn't considered this angle, but as I thought about it, I realized that David was wrong. Richard Blackwood's respect for me isn't based on his respect for you. It's based on his respect for my work. He offered me this job because of my qualifications, not because of my husband. You sure about that? I'm sure. And David, even if I weren't sure, I would rather be divorced and respected than married and hidden away. David looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. You've changed, Caroline. You used to be softer, more understanding. I used to be more willing to accept unacceptable treatment. That's not the same thing. So what happens now? I looked around our kitchen, at the house we had shared for 5 years, at the man I had married when I thought love was enough to overcome fundamental incompatibilities. Now, I start my new job on Monday, and you decide whether you want to be married to a successful woman or whether you want to find someone who makes you feel more important by being less accomplished. And if I choose to stay, if I choose to support your career and try to rebuild our marriage, then you start by being genuinely happy for my success instead of seeing it as a threat to your masculinity. David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with concepts that challenged everything he believed about marriage and gender roles and professional success. Caroline, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I'm strong enough to be married to someone more successful than I am. Then that's your answer. What? If you don't know if you can be genuinely happy about your wife's success, then you shouldn't be married to someone who's planning to be very successful. David nodded slowly, and I could see him beginning to accept the reality of our situation. So we're getting divorced. We're getting divorced. Because I was too insecure to bring you to a party. Because you were too insecure to value what you had instead of being ashamed of it. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly amicable, largely because David was too embarrassed by the circumstances to fight about anything. He moved out within a month, eventually relocating to Phoenix, where he found a position with a smaller company and started over with people who didn't know the story of how he had lost his last job. The local business community was fascinated by our divorce, particularly when the details of David's career implosion became known. The story of a man who had lost his promotion because he was too ashamed to bring his accomplished wife to his own celebration became the subject of whispered conversations at every corporate event in the city. I started my position at Sterling Financial Group the following Monday, and within 6 months, I had built the foundation into one of the most influential philanthropic organizations in the region. We funded educational initiatives, supported emerging artists, and partnered with cultural institutions throughout the Southeast. Richard Blackwood had been right about the visibility that came with the role. Within a year, I was featured in the Business Journal as one of the power women of Atlanta, spoke at conferences about strategic philanthropy, and served on the boards of several major nonprofits. Most importantly, I worked with people who valued my expertise and wanted to build on my ideas rather than hide them away. The transformation in my professional life was matched by a transformation in my personal confidence. Working with Richard and his team, being valued for my intelligence and creativity, being seen as an asset rather than an embarrassment, all of it reminded me of who I really was underneath the diminishment I had accepted for too many years. I also began to pay more attention to my appearance, not because I thought I was unattractive, but because I realized I had been dressing like someone trying to disappear rather than someone who belonged in boardrooms and galas. I updated my wardrobe with a kind of sophisticated, expensive clothing that reflected my new status. I got more adventurous with my hair, adding subtle highlights that made my natural auburn color even more striking. I invested in professional makeup sessions that taught me how to enhance my features for television interviews and public speaking engagements. The result was that I looked like what I had always been, a beautiful, accomplished woman who belonged in any room she entered. A year after my divorce was final, I was attending a charity gala when I ran into Jennifer Walsh, one of David's former colleagues. She approached me during the cocktail hour, looking elegant and successful in the way that David had always claimed to want in a wife. "Caroline," she said, air kissing me on both cheeks, "you look absolutely stunning. I love what you've done with your hair." "Thank you, Jennifer. You look wonderful too. I have to tell you, I've been following your work at the Sterling Foundation, and I'm so impressed. The arts education initiative you launched last month is exactly what this city needs." "That's kind of you to say." Jennifer moved closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Can I ask you something? Is it true that David actually didn't bring you to his promotion party? That he left you at home?" I had been expecting this question for months, knowing that David's story had become the subject of gossip and speculation throughout his former professional network. "It's true. My God, what was he thinking? I mean, look at you. You're gorgeous, you're accomplished, you're doing exactly the kind of work that impresses everyone who matters. He must have been out of his mind. I think he was scared. Scared of what? Scared that people would realize he had married someone more impressive than he was. Jennifer shook her head in amazement. Well, his loss is Richard Blackwood's gain. I heard he specifically recruited you because he was so impressed by your museum work. Richard has been an incredible mentor. And I heard David is selling insurance in Phoenix now. I believe so. God, can you imagine? From regional sales director to insurance salesman, all because he was too insecure to be proud of his own wife. I excused myself from the conversation, not wanting to participate in David's professional obituary, but I found myself thinking about the choices we had both made and how differently our lives had turned out. David had been so afraid of being overshadowed by my success that he had chosen to hide me away rather than share in my accomplishments. In doing so, he had destroyed his own career and lost the chance to be part of the recognition and respect I was receiving. I had chosen to stop accepting diminishment and start demanding the appreciation I deserved. In doing so, I had found work that fulfilled me, colleagues who respected me, and a life where my accomplishments were celebrated rather than hidden. 2 years later, I was featured on the cover of Southern Business Magazine as Philanthropist of the Year. The article detailed the foundation's impact on education and arts programming throughout the region, and it included a sidebar about my personal journey from museum curator to corporate executive. The journalist had asked me about my divorce and whether my former husband had been supportive of my career transition. My former husband taught me an important lesson, I had said. He taught me the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves the idea of you. Someone who truly loves you wants the whole world to see your accomplishments. Someone who loves the idea of you wants you to stay small so they can feel big. The article was picked up by several national publications, and I received dozens of messages from women who said my story had inspired them to demand better treatment in their own relationships. One of those messages was from David. Caroline, he wrote, I saw the magazine article and wanted to congratulate you on everything you've accomplished. I also wanted to apologize one more time for not appreciating what I had when I had it. You were right about everything, and I was wrong about everything that mattered. I hope you're happy. I wrote back briefly, thank you for the kind words. I hope you're happy too. And I meant it. David had taught me valuable lessons about self-worth and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your success rather than being threatened by it. Those lessons had led me to a life that was more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined when I was married to someone who saw my accomplishments as embarrassments. 3 years after our divorce, I was invited to speak at a conference for professional women about building confidence in corporate environments. During the Q&A, a session, a young woman asked me how I had found the strength to leave a marriage that was diminishing me. I realized that I had a choice, I told her. I could continue accepting treatment that made me smaller, or I could fight for the recognition I deserved. The moment I chose to fight, everything changed. But wasn't it scary, she asked, starting over, not knowing if you'd succeed? It was terrifying, I admitted. But you know what was more terrifying? The idea of spending the rest of my life hiding my light under a bushel because someone else was too insecure to let me shine. After the conference, a woman approached me who looked familiar, though I couldn't place her immediately. Caroline, I'm Sarah Blackwood, Richard's daughter. Sarah, I've heard so much about you. I wanted to thank you for what you said today, and I wanted to tell you something that my father has never shared with you directly. What's that? When he first told me about what happened with your husband, I was in a relationship with someone who was constantly criticizing my career choices and making me feel like my ambitions were too much. Your story gave me the courage to end that relationship. I'm glad I could help. You did more than help. You showed me what it looks like when someone refuses to be diminished. I've been following your work for 3 years now, and you've become exactly the kind of role model my father hoped you would be. Sometimes the cruelest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly how little they value what you have to offer. It forces you to decide whether you're going to accept their assessment or fight for the recognition you deserve. I chose to fight, and in doing so, I discovered that the woman David had considered too ugly and unsuccessful for his promotion party was actually someone that influential people were eager to work with, learn from, and celebrate. The woman he had hidden away became the woman everyone wanted to be seen with. The woman he had been ashamed of became a woman he could only dream of being worthy of. And the woman he had diminished became someone he would spend the rest of his life regretting he had lost. But more than that, I became someone I was proud to be, not because of external validation, but because I had found the courage to demand the respect I deserved and to build a life that reflected my true value. The woman in the mirror wasn't ordinary. She wasn't someone who disappeared into the background. She was someone who commanded attention, who made things happen, who changed lives and communities through her work. She was someone worth celebrating, and finally, she was surrounded by people who understood that.